Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope the content encourages you and helps you build your faith. Now enjoy the message.
I heard somebody else, a friend of mine was talking to me about this. It's so true. Now is the time of year where we start getting emails from every place we have ever bought something from in like the history of being it's insane. Like it is absolute madness. My friend was talking to me about it the other day. I woke up on Black Friday, and I had over 200 emails. You know, every time you go to check out, even at like real stores, they're like, hey, just enter your email real quick. If you want to email receipt, do you want to? They're preparing for something, and they hammered me on Black Friday. I mean, I had over 200 emails from all of these stores. And then on top of that, Anna buys stuff, and for her to use my PayPal, she's got to use my email. So then she's putting my email in there. So I'm getting stuff about lip gloss and leggings and all this stuff. And I'm like, look, you don't even know who you're emailing, right? You get hundreds of these emails. So I went through and I deleted all of them. And then guess what happened on Saturday? Hey, Black Friday's been extended. Keep the same deals. Another 200 emails, right? So I was like, oh my goodness, I delete them all. Guess what Sunday is? Last day of Black Friday weekend. So here's all your emails again. You get another couple hundred emails, right? So I delete all of these emails, and then I'm like, Lord, tell me it's ended. Guess what I got on Monday? Cyber Monday! Another couple hundred emails from people trying to sell me everything from lip gloss to perky jerky to meat shipped overnight to it's just insane, right? It's literally insane. Delete them all. Guess what Tuesday starts? 12 days of Christmas. Here comes the 12 days of Christmas sale, and now I'm getting Echo Dots and Echo Shows and all of these things that I don't need that talk to me that I'm trying to get rid of because they distract me anyway, and I get all of these emails. And so finally, it took me about an hour and a half. I went through my inbox, and I unsubscribed over and over, and some of these, they make it so difficult. It's like you click unsubscribe, and then it's like select which communications you want to unsubscribe from. I'm like, all 200 of them. I don't even know how I got on the list. So then I select all of them, and then I click, and it's like, are we sure we want to break up? Yeah. I'm like, what? I'm like, are you sure this is the end? Are we breaking up? And I am like, unsubscribe, And something amazing happened. I spent an hour and a half unsubscribing from all of this stuff, and guess what happened on Wednesday? Silence. I got nothing. My inbox was empty. It was all gone. It was all over with. And here's where I feel like we get with rest. I feel like we get to a place where we start stacking up all of these millions of things that we have going on that hey man, what's going on? I'm so busy with this, or I'm so busy with this, or I'm so busy with holidays, and now I'm so busy with summer because we're traveling. Now I'm so busy with work, and I'm so busy with it. So then we get to a place of overwhelm, stress, and anxiety, so we delete it all, but then guess what happens? A couple months later, we're stressed again. A couple months later, we're anxious again. A couple months later, we're worn out again. A couple months later, we're restless again. Why? Because we've just been deleting things and haven't been unsubscribing from the wrong way of thinking. There is a shift in our thinking that we have to make. We have to realize something. God did not save us. God did not rescue us to do. He rescued us to rest. To rest solely in Him. Now, it is our ability to do is sustained by our ability to rest. Your ability to do is only as good as the sustainability of your rest. Else you light up, and burn out. So how do we enter into this place of real, intentional rest? I'm not talking about, we'll dive into that. Let me just, I can't wait to get on the subject of cell phones. Are you ready? Are you ready for some We're going to be stomping those things out by the end of this day, right? Let's do this. Let me give you really quick follow me, okay? Follow me simply through this timeline of Scripture. It's going to help you. We're trying to cram 4 weeks worth of stuff into 2 weeks, right? So let me give you just a timeline, a history of rest in the Bible. This is really, really going to help you, all right? Good. They already got it up there. Genesis 2, 1 through 3. This is the first place rest is implemented. So the creations of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. Verse 3, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy. Isn't it interesting that God didn't bless the work days, he blessed the rest day? So God blesses the rest day. God blessed the seventh day. He declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all of his creation. So God institutes us the example of rest. And on the seventh day, he rested. And on the seventh day, he called it holy. And on the seventh day, he called it blessed because he stopped working and started resting. Now, let me take you to the Sabbath, okay? Because rest is implemented before the Sabbath. That's really important to understand because there can be a Jewish history debate of, oh, well, Jesus fulfilled the law, so we don't need the Sabbath anymore. Okay, I agree. Rest was before the Sabbath. Rest is carried on after the Sabbath. Jesus gives us the perfect example of rest. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11, come to me, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you will find rest for your souls. It's not a debate of the Sabbath, but just for biblical timeline's sake, rest was implemented before the Sabbath. Now we go to the Sabbath, Exodus 28 through 11. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. And you don't think you got enough time to do what you need to do in 6 days? But on the seventh day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. So God institutes the Sabbath, and he institutes it as a day of reflection on his creation, on what he has done, and his goodness. Right now, Deuteronomy 5, verse 15, this is a reminder to the children of Israel, says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. Boy, we've been there, haven't we? We've been slaves in Egypt for a while. Remember you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Why do we rest on the Sabbath day? Because of his strong hand and powerful arm. So there are two reflections that we see with rest and then the implementation of the Sabbath. Number one reflection is we reflect on God's goodness in creation, right? So the first thing that we reflect on is on 6 days, God did everything. So on the seventh day, we're going to rest and we're going to reflect on God's goodness in creation. The second reflection is on God's power in salvation. You get where I'm headed with this, right? Because we have a misconception of what rest is. So he's saying you rest in reflection of God's goodness in creation, and you rest in reflection of God's power in salvation. So when we're truly resting, we are saying, God, you are so good. You have created everything. You have created my house, you've created my family, you've created this world, you've created this church, and I just give you glory for it. And Lord, I rest today because you have saved me, and your powerful hand and your strong arm have redeemed me, and you have set me free. Now, here's what happens. For those of you that walk through out of Egypt, we're just going to be connecting dots all day, right? So God institutes rest. He regulates it with the Sabbath. And then the Jews start adding rules and regulations around it. And isn't this amazing that they turned what was supposed to be rest into work? can only observe it on these certain days and within these certain times, and you can only eat these certain foods, and you can only drink these certain drinks, and you can only sacrifice these certain animals, and you can only eat these certain foods. And if you mess any of that up, you have broken the Sabbath. And if you have broken the Sabbath, you are subject to punishment. And they took what God meant for rest and they made it work. Isn't it amazing how we can turn days of rest into days of work? We don't even call them days of rest anymore. We call them days off. Talk to people and they say, oh man, I got a day off and I got so much to do. Oh man, I got a day off and I got so much going on. I got to get this done and I got to get this done and I got to do this and I've got to handle this. And we're doing what the Jews did with the Sabbath. We are turning what God meant as a day of rest into a day of work by adding stuff to our to-do list, and just because we don't go to a job, but we still go and do everything that we need to do, completely distracted from rest. Now let's bring it full circle, because we know, we talked about it, I think, last week, 2 weeks ago, Matthew 5:17, that Jesus fulfills the law, right? Jesus is the fulfillment of these Mosaic covenant regulations, right? So Jesus in his fulfillment, Romans 14:5-8, this is bringing this thing full circle. He says, in the same way, some of you think that one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. He's talking to the Jewish regulations on the Sabbath. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. Those who eat any kind of food do so to honor the Lord. And they give thanks to God before eating. And those who refuse to eat certain foods also want to please the Lord and give thanks to God. This is so good. Verse 7, for we do not live for ourselves or die for ourselves. Selfishness will destroy everything. It will destroy relationship. It will destroy rest. It will destroy peace. And what is he saying? What did they do? They took their liberties to rest and made it all about themselves. What did we talk about with freedom? You've been set free. Let my people go so you can worship me. Your freedom is not so you can do whatever you want. Your rest is not so you can do whatever you want. You're given the opportunity to rest, to refuel your soul, to rebuild your spirit. He says, for we do not live for ourselves or die for ourselves. Verse 8, if we live, it's to honor the Lord. And if we die, it's to honor the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. That's Paul's final stamp on rest. Is he saying rest is no longer about what day of the week. Rest is no longer about what food you eat. Rest is no longer about what food you reject. Rest is no longer about what you drink or what you don't drink. Rest is no longer about what animal that you sacrifice. Rest is no longer about you. Rest is part of your worship of the Lord because it's not about you. It's about him. And when you learn that about rest, you walk into our focus. Our entire focus is God has called us to rest in him. We are called not just to rest. We're called not just to freedom, but we're called to rest in him, to breathe in him, to satisfy our souls in him. And that rest has two reflections: God's goodness in creation and God's power in salvation. You are resting when you are reflecting on God's goodness in creation and God's power in salvation. Now let's go to the most ultimate distraction of all time from the focus of God's goodness in creation and his power in salvation. calling it the cell phone. You need to hear me. This is not an anti-cell phone message, but I will tell you, I don't know of anything else, honestly, I don't know of anything else consistently across the board that robs people's focus, that steals and manipulates their attention, and completely wrecks any sort of focus that they have on rest by running their mind through a million different things that are going on, like a cell phone. We got to understand this, okay? And again, I'm not anti cell phone, but it was social media. I just heard this last week, and it's so true. You realize, right, that you are not a customer of Instagram. You're not a customer of Facebook. You realize this, right? Let me show you this to you from a business perspective. You download the app and you post your pictures and you make your captions and you think you're a customer using their product, right? Right? No, you're not at all. You are the product, okay? You didn't pay a dime to be on that app. You're the product, and you know what they're selling? They're selling your attention. They're selling your attention to advertisers. You're being manipulated like crazy. They are selling your attention to people who will pay for your attention. So they have all of these data and analytics that are coming in, and they're saying, I got a 29-year-old girl in Huntsville, Texas that spends 3 hours a day on Instagram. I'm going to sell every leggings ad and low-carb dessert recipe I got to them right there. Right? That's what they do. But then what does a great business do? They're always trying to improve their product, right? So in order to improve their product, what do they need more of from you? Attention. So what do? They add updates. They add new face filters. They add new ways of spending more and more and more time on these apps so they can sell your attention. That's why when people tell me, oh, when I rest and I relax, I just like to lay on the couch and scroll through social media for an hour. And I'm saying, you're not resting, you're being manipulated. Your attention is being robbed. The whole purpose is not to keep you reflecting on the goodness of God in creation and the power of God in salvation. It's to find your interest. It's to find your likes. It's to find the things that you have found interesting and manipulate you into looking at more of them so they can bill advertisers more money. Again, here's why this is helpful. Again, not anti all of this, but you need to know this. When I do my devotions now, I am viciously aggressive with keeping these things away from me. Because what happens? We go to read our Bible and we wind up scrolling, right? And then we wind up checking email because we get an indication. And then all of a sudden, our opportunity to rest is robbed by these things that we think we're just customers of. They're manipulating us into giving our attention. When you have that awareness, you have the ability to put boundaries around your rest and say, you know what? When I am resting, the phone is off. When I'm resting, social media is away. It's not you can look at social media, but don't look at social media as your only form of rest and think you're sustaining and rebuilding your spirit. You're distracting your spirit, okay? Now, let's dive in. Because this is where we land with first, part 1. Next week we'll have part 2 with Jesus saying, come to me and I'll give you rest. Part 1, Hebrews 4, 1 through 11. God's promise of entering his rest still stands. There you go. From the very beginning of time, his promise of entering into his rest still stands. So we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. It's a horrific thing to think that we could go through life stressed out, filled with anxiety, and never rested in the Lord and never at peace in the Lord. For this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them. He's talking about the children of Israel. But it did no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listen to God. For only we who believe can enter his rest. So it is believing, when we believe, we enter into his rest, the rest that he has for us. For the others, God said, in my anger I took an oath, they will never enter my place of rest. Even though this rest has been ready since he made the world. We're touching to the very beginning of our timeline when at creation, God instituted rest. We know it is ready because of the place in the scriptures where he mentions that on the seventh day, now we're at the Sabbath, on the seventh day, God rested from all his work. But in the other passage, God said, they will never enter my place of rest. So God's rest is there for people to enter. But those who first heard this good news failed to enter because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. And it's amazing how Jesus brings this to fulfillment. So God set another time for entering his rest. Time is today. God announced this through David much later in the words already quoted. Today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Now, if Joshua had succeeded in giving them rest, God would not have spoken about another day of rest still to come. So there is a special rest waiting for the people of God. For all who entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. Let me give you really quick, I did in the beginning, I had this in the beginning, the 5 stages to rest so that we can push on. Number 1, God instituted rest at creation. Number 2, God regulated rest through the Sabbath. Number 3, the Jews corrupted that rest through religion. Jesus, number 4, fulfilled that rest through salvation. Verse 5, now, number 5, this is not Luke's Bible. Now we're living in that rest through sanctification. That is your biblical timeline of rest. Instituted at creation, regulated through Sabbath, corrupted by religion, fulfilled by Jesus at salvation. Now we're living in it through sanctification. 3 points and we're done. You already chewed up, spit out enough to know. Let me give you 3 ways to enter into this rest. And this is a different kind of rest. You get me now. I'm not talking about eating Doritos and scrolling Netflix and wow, I'm really rested up and feeling great, right? No, I'm talking about an intentional rest with focus on what God has called us to reflect on, to refill and renew our souls. Number 1, we have to understand we now enter this rest through faith. How do I get into this rest that you're talking? No. Here's the question that some of us would ask. Catch this. What do I do to enter into this rest? What do I need to do to have more rest? What does he say? Hebrews 4:1-3. God's promise of entering his rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that we would miss out. Verse 2, for this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them, but it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. We enter rest through faith, not what we can do. We enter into rest by saying, Lord, I have faith that you can handle everything else I have on my to-do list. You don't get to rest by checking off everything in your to-do list, because then what is your rest predicated on? Your ability to do. To do. God is saying, my rest is here by faith. You may have a million things going on, but those million things are always going to be a million things. But through faith, you can enter into the rest that I have for you. My son, I told you a couple weeks ago, when we put him to bed, we lock his bedroom door because he liked to sneak out at night, and we were afraid he was literally going to leave or try to make pancakes and start the grill and burn the house down and everything else. So we put him to bed, and we lock the door, and we have a monitor on, and then I wake up in the morning, and I'd go to my office, and I'd just watch him, and I'd listen for him, and he'd knock on the door, and then I'd go get him, right? Well, he got to this point where he was fairly confident in his ability to hold it all night long, so I said, all right, buddy, you've graduated. Your door's unlocked. You can leave your room when you wake up in the morning. He was like, really? I said, yeah, man. And you don't even need to wear a diaper. You can just go to the bathroom. You can go. You can get a snack. You can get your tablet or whatever you need to do, and then Daddy will come get you. And he was like, okay, great. So I put him to bed that night, and that morning I woke up and I went into my office, and about 6:30 I hear this vicious pounding on the door, kicking the door out. It scared me to death. And I jumped up and I looked at the monitor, and he is just, he's like this, and he's just banging on the door, and he's screaming. And I opened up the door and I said, Bubby, what's wrong? And he said, Daddy, I gotta pee. And I said, son, the door's unlocked. Go. Like, go. Why didn't you go? And he said, I forgot that you unlocked the door. I'm like, dude, you didn't have to punch holes in my door. You didn't have to sit there and stress yourself out. But here's the thing. I feel like with stress, with anxiety, with worry, with fear, with all of these things, that we are trapped in this room of all of these things, and we're trying to figure out what we can do to get out of them. We're punching on doors. We're screaming. We're yelling. And the Lord is telling us here, you want rest? Walk through the door of faith. Amen. Enter in through faith. Quit trying to check every box. Quit trying to do everything you need to do. Quit trying to accomplish everything you need to accomplish before you can sense any sort of rest in your life. And by faith, say, Lord, this is yours. Amen. This is not mine. Lord, I'm not going to stress about this anymore. I'm not going to worry about this anymore. I'm going to cast my cares upon you because you care for me, and I'm going to enter into your rest. We enter rest through faith. We sustain rest through obedience. How do you stay in rest? How is rest sustained? How do I continue this? We sustain it through obedience. Hebrews 4:4-8. It says, we know it is ready because of the place in the scriptures where it mentions on the seventh day, God rested from all his work. But the other passage, God said, they will never enter my place of rest. So God's rest is there for people to enter, but those who first heard this good news failed to enter because they disobeyed God. Disobedience kept them from the rest that God had prepared for them. The disobedience was not entering into it by faith. Can I tell you something? The only cure for a restless soul is rest in Christ. The only cure you will find for a restless soul, a soul longing for more and looking for more and starting up new things all the time and looking for new things and finding different ways and to do different things to satisfy the soul. The only way a restless soul is satisfied is through rest in Christ. We have to realize this is how God designed us. My grandpa, who was, backing up, when I was a kid, Indiana Jones was the man. Any Indiana Jones fans? Anyone? Has it get any better than Harrison Ford? Amazing. Indiana Jones was the stuff, right? So he had this whip. Right? He had this was like his weapon, you know? He didn't need a pistola. He just had the whip, and somebody pull a pistol on him, and he'd whip it out of their hands, you know? And so I wanted this whip really bad. I was like, man, I want a whip like Indiana Jones. So my grandpa, he went to the hardware store, and he bought this wooden handle, and he bought this long piece of strong leather, right? And so he got back, and he put all this together, and he made me this whip. And I'm telling you, I was Indiana Jones running around as a kid. I was popping cans off of logs. I was popping hummingbirds in my grandma's feeder. I was just anything I could see. I was just kapow, kapow, kapow with this whip, and I loved it. It was so cool. And my grandpa, he was a craftsman. He was a builder. He was so proud of that whip. He put my name on it. He did all this cool stuff for it. So I was always walking around. You find me, you find a whip in my hand, you know? And so I was coming around with this whip, and my cousin Erin started smarting off at me, right? She was much older than me. And she had a mouth on her. Aaron, you had a mouth on you, I remember. And so I'm sitting there, and I was coming in through, we had this, my grandpa's at their old farmhouse, they had this screened-in porch area, and then they had this little washroom area, and then there was the kitchen table, and the kitchen table was right there. And I remember, my cousin, it made me mad or something, or maybe even didn't make me mad. I was just being Indiana Jones. So I was in that washroom, and I was like, I bet I can tag her with this whip right around that corner, right? And so I remember I was like, and I heard this, and then I heard, ah! And I looked around the corner, and she had this black line underneath, just right underneath her eye. And they're like, oh my goodness, he whipped Aaron, like Indiana Jones, baby. And so my grandpa comes in, and he takes that whip from me, and he winds that leather around there, and he goes down to his garage. I followed him down there, and it was all open rafters in his basement, and he stuck it up there in the rafter, and I was looking up there, and I was like, Grandpa, hey, can I have my whip? And he said, no. He said, I didn't design that whip for you to whip other people with it. And he said, since you did that, you never get it back in. I can remember walking into his basement years later, seeing that whip up in those rafters collecting dust, thinking, man, there was a day I was Indiana Jones. There was a day I was popping everything. And I remember for years, that whip sat up there. And for years, I wanted it. And for years, I recognized I didn't have it because I used it for something it wasn't designed for. And for us, we spend years wanting rest, years desiring peace, years longing for calm. But the problem is we're going through life operating in a way God did not design us. He did not design us for non-stop work and pressure and days off, or not even days off because I got things that I got to do. He designed us to be sustained in Him, to be rested in Him, to be built up in Him, to reflect on His goodness of creation, to reflect on His power in salvation, and to take in His goodness to rebuild, restore our soul, to sustain our ability to work. You want to work longer. You want to work stronger. You want to work better. How is your rest? And I don't mean lazy. I mean, how is your rest in the Lord? How are you resting in Him? How are you rebuilding in Him? How are you renewing in Him? Because they missed out on this rest through disobedience. And then we finish here. Couldn't be as clear as this. We grow in rest. So, backtrack. We enter rest through faith. We sustain rest through obedience, and we grow in rest through our best efforts, our very best efforts. Hebrews 4, 9 through 11. So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. Verse 11. So let us do our best to enter that rest. Can I tell you something? That word for best is your absolute primo significant effort. Do you realize God calls your best effort to your rest? God's asking you to give your best effort to the rest and restoration and renewal of your soul. He is saying, so let us do our very best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as the people of Israel did, we will fall. So our three biblical examples of rest, all right? Making it as practical as I can make this. Number one, we have a continual rest in Christ. Continual. We are not to be anxious. We're not to be fearful. We're not to be worried because we continually rest in the Lord, and we continually through faith enter into that rest, and we continually sustain that rest through obedience. There is a continued rest in the Lord. Then there is a daily rest of devotion. Joshua talks about this day and night I will worship the Lord. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There is a time, there is a set apart time where each day I rest in the Lord. We call that devotion. And can I tell you, a life without devotion is a life lived on emotion. That's a dangerous place to be. A life without daily devotion right here is a life lived purely on emotion. Purely on how you feel in the second. or how you want to erupt or react or anything else. But when you have devotion and rest in the Lord that's anchoring your soul on a daily basis, you are living from devotion and not emotion. I don't know, I'm telling you. And then there is a weekly rest of reflection and power, right? So we have a continual rest, we have a daily rest of devotion, and we have a weekly rest where we set aside time to reflect on God's goodness and on God's power. I honestly am getting to a point where I'm saying, I don't know how you can be mature in your faith and spiritually undisciplined at the same time. Because the root of spiritual discipline is us growing in our rest, our continual rest, our daily rest and devotion, and our weekly rest in the goodness and power of God. So we can't reach a place of maturity if we're immature in our rest and we don't know how to rest. So we grow in rest through our best efforts. A friend of mine who is a bodybuilder, I lived with him for a while, and man, it's just miserable living with someone who's a bodybuilder, right? I mean, the food is salmon all the time and tuna and egg whites and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, he just looks so strong, and he walks around with his shirt off all the time, and I'm sitting there, flipping pancakes, and I'm like, wow, thanks, dude, maybe one day. So then you get this pressure to start working out. So I started working out like him, and I started training really hard, and I started wanting to get in really good shape. So I was eating chicken breasts and brown rice 6 times a week, or 6 times a day, every day of the week, and I was just on his grind, right? And I was starting to really get in shape, and then I started to get really fatigued, and I started to get really tired. And I was talking to him, and I was like, man, I'm working to get like you. And he said, no, you're not. And I said, yeah, I am, brother. I'm grinding 6 days a week. And he said, that's your problem. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, no, you're working too hard. I said, no. I'm trying to catch up with you. And he said, I work out 3 days a week. I said, there's absolutely no way. And he said, yes. He said, the most important thing in training, and this guy's a bodybuilder. I mean, he knows a thing or two about it. He said, the most important thing in training is not working out every day. It's taking advantage of rest and recovery. So because here's what happens in rest and recovery. When you work out, you rip muscles. You're tearing muscles apart, right? And if you don't take the time to rest and recover, and they come halfway back together, then you go work them again, they're actually getting weaker, not stronger. So he said when you're training 6 to 7 days a week, you are depleting yourself. You're wearing yourself out. He said, when I train 3 days a week, I give my body time to rest and recover, and my muscles fully repair to a place where they're stronger the next time. The most important thing to get stronger is not go. It's rest and recovery. It is taking time to rest in the Lord. It's taking time to recover in the Lord. It is continually living in His rest. It is daily living in His rest and devotion, and it is weekly reflecting in His rest on His goodness in creation and His power in salvation. When we're living from this place of rest, we are sustained to do for the long haul what God wants us to do.
Everybody, thanks again for joining us. We believe God has something great for your life, and we hope this message encouraged you to take the next step in your faith. Have a great week.